Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2021 Ford Ranger, we're going to be showing you how to install the Demco Air Force One supplemental braking system with the wireless coach link monitor. But before we do that, why don't we check it out and make sure that this is going to work for you. Before we jump right in and start talking about the braking system, I figured it'd be beneficial just to kind of refresh ourselves and touch base on the 5 main components that we're going to need to flat tow our Ranger down the road in the first place. There's going to be a total of 5 main components that you're going to need. First one's going to be the base plate, and that's going to provide us with a solid and reliable attachment point. That way we can hook our tow bar up. Tow bar is going to be the second component, and this is going to be the physical link that actually connects the front of your truck to the back of your motorhome. Third main component will be safety cables, and these are just there in the event of an unlikely disconnect. They're going to keep everything paired together. The fourth main component will be tow bar wiring, and what that's going to do is transfer the lighting functions from the back of your motorhome to the back of your Ford, keeping you safe and legal. And last but not least, the fifth main component will be a supplemental braking system. And what this is going to do is apply the brakes in your Ranger whenever you hit the brakes in your coach, bringing you to a quicker and more complete stop. There are a couple more small things that I do recommend for the Ranger. One of them is what's called a battery charge line. And what that's going to do is essentially keep your Ranger's battery topped off and trickle charged whenever you're flat towing it behind the motorhome. And that's because the braking systems are going to use battery power when they operate and slowly but surely deplete the battery. So having a charge line in place will prevent that, and everything will work like you'd expect it to. The other thing is what's called a brake light relay. And what that's going to do, whenever you're say at a stoplight and you have, let's just say, your left turn signal on, without a brake light relay, what would happen is the brake lights would override the turn signal. So even though you had your blinker on at the back of the truck, you just show brake lights. And so having a brake light relay in there, it's going to allow everything to operate the way it should. Have the one brake light on, the turn signal going, and keep everything going like you'd expect it to. With that out of the way though, let's talk braking systems. So the Air Force One is a permanent type braking system, and it's designed to work with motorhomes that have air brakes. And if you're looking for a permanent type system and you have air brakes on your motorhome, this is definitely the way to go. I always recommend this one. It's super simple, and because of that, it makes it very reliable. We haven't really had any issues at all with these. Matter of fact, I mean, even when you're ready to hook up, you just gotta connect your breakaway switch and this airline tube, and that's it. Everything else is already set up and ready to go for you. With that said, if your motorhome does not have air brakes and you're looking for a permanent type system, the other one that I would recommend is the stay and play. So again, that one is similar to the Air Force One in terms of how it's built and everything. They're just a really reliable system. We do a lot of them here, and they work out very well for us a lot of times. So just wanted to mention that. And that kind of brings you to my next point. There's also portable type braking systems. And with those, they work really well, and they'll work with your Ranger whether you have a motorhome with air brakes or regular brakes. And the one I'm referring to is the Blue Ox Patriot 3. Again, a lot of success with those. Really haven't ran into any issues with them. Kind of the downside is, though, you do have to set it up and take it out of the vehicle every time you want to flat tow. But it's only a couple of steps, not really a game changer by any means. But that might be a good option for you if you change motorhomes a lot, or change your towed vehicle a lot, or have multiple vehicles, whatever the case may be. But I just wanted to kind of define the terms and make sure that, you know, before we go any further, that this kit will even work with your particular setup or not. Something that I do want to bring up, because we actually see quite a bit of it here, is, you know, let's say in a few years, say if you end up going with this system and then in a few years you plan on changing your motorhome, upgrading or getting a new towed vehicle, is there a solution where you can still keep some of your parts? And the answer is yes. So for example, there's second vehicle kits for the vehicle side as well as the motorhome side. So let's say you end up getting a new motorhome a few years and you don't feel like taking all those parts back off, you can grab the coach side kit, hook it up on your motorhome, and you'll still be able to pair up the Ranger. On the same note, let's say if you end up getting a newer Ranger or another vehicle, there's second vehicle kits for just the car side too. So you don't have to buy the whole thing again and redo it all. You can get just what you need. That even holds true, like I said, that second vehicle kit, if you happen to have another car, maybe you tow your truck and then maybe a sports car every now and again or something like that. You can always get the second vehicle kit, put it on both cars, and that way, whichever one you decide you want to tow, it's ready to go, and you can hook up to your motorhome. Something that is really important when deciding on setting up a flat tow and picking out all your parts is how everything's going to work and your experience with it, right? You want to have everything work the way it should and provide you with a comfortable driving experience. You don't want to be stressed out the whole way there to your destination. And with this particular braking system, it's a truly proportional type braking system, and so what that means is it's going to give you a really good ride. So more or less what happens is your towed vehicle's brakes are going to match the pressure that you apply up here. So everything's going to be working in conjunction. All right, so just to kind of give you an example, let's say if you're approaching a stoplight or something along them lines, and you're just maybe a quarter of the way on the brakes. The Ranger's brakes are going to do the same thing. On the other hand, maybe if you're on the highway, need to come to an emergency stop, there's an accident or something ahead, or someone pulls out in front of you. If you really stand on that brake pedal, the Ranger's brakes are going to do the same thing, and that's going to help slow you down a lot more controlled and as a unit, as opposed to the Ranger trying to brake harder or softer than your motorhome and kind of wanting to push you around. So definitely a bonus there, being proportional, and should make your driving experience that much better. With this being the wireless coach link version, it comes with this box here that plugs into a cigarette lighter type 12 volt outlet, and this is going to allow you to monitor when the brake pedal in your Ranger is being pushed down. So for example, I'm all hooked up. If I hit the brakes in the motorhome, this should light up red, and it does. So when that happens, it's letting us know that the brake pedal in the Ranger is being pushed down. So you can keep an eye on things and make sure that pedal is being pushed. On the same note, if something happens and it gets stuck or something like that, and you're not on the brakes and you see these are red, you're going to have an issue, something's going on back there, right? So pretty convenient. I really like the idea, and it seems like a lot of other people do too, because there's actually another kit, essentially same exact kit as this Air Force One, just doesn't have this, except you get an LED strip that goes on the Ranger's windshield that'll light up red and let you know what's going on. But it's nice to have something in the dash, where you can easily see what's going on and be able just to kind of monitor things whenever you're going down the road. Because like I said earlier, you want something that's going to instill confidence, and so little things like this really does go a long way. So I did talk about a little bit how easy this is to use and set up, and when you're ready to hook up, you're just going to have this airline here that you're going to plug into front of the Ranger, back of the motorhome, and then you're going to have a cable that goes to your motorhome's hitch to the breakaway switch, which is this piece here. And this is actually a safety device, and so what will happen in the event of an unlikely disconnect, this pin will get pulled out, and what that's going to do is apply the brakes in the Ranger just to help kind of slow things down and get everything back under control. Other than that though, when it comes down to it, if your motorhome has air brakes and you're looking for a system that you can just plug in real quick and get going on the road, this is one definitely worth considering. As far as getting it installed, In terms of braking systems as a whole, it's really not too bad. It's not the easiest nor the hardest. Definitely doable. So as long as you stay focused, this is something you should be able to do. Speaking of that though, why don't we go ahead, pull into the garage and hook it up together now. To begin our installation on our motorhome, we're going to be working underneath it, and usually just in front of the rear axle. So that's where we're going to be. Keep in mind, you don't have to have a lift or anything to get this done. You can get under there and do this, but so we can actually see what's going on, I decided to put it up in the air. That way we can have a good look at it. So underneath the motorhome, in front of our rear axle, first thing that you're going to want to do is mount up the tank, and it actually worked out real good. There's a couple of bolts that were holding a factory bracket on, so I just took them out. I got some longer bolts and used that attachment point to actually mount up our tank. So that's where that is. Then we're going to have 3 airlines that we need to hook up. So this one here is going to go to our supply line, which we'll get to in a minute. This one here is going to go to our metered air, and this one is going to run all the way to the back to our fitting. And here in a moment I'll show you how to plug these lines in and cut them and everything else, so if you're unsure, just wait a moment. But with that said, let's focus on our supply line and our metered air line. These are going to run essentially just maybe a foot or two towards the back and up where we have them connected to our motorhome's factory airlines. About a foot ahead of where we mounted our tank, this is where we're going to tap into the factory line. So we have our metered air line, which is this one here. That's generally the smaller line, which is this one here. And a way you can check is if you unplug the line, you should only get air pressure coming out of it whenever you apply the brakes in the motorhome. You cut the factory line in half, use the included T it in, plug in the airline from our metered air port on our tank. When you do that, sometimes the factory lines will be dirty, just kind of have some gritty stuff on them. Make sure you wipe them down, get them smooth and clean. The next one will be our supply line. So we routed our line over from the tank. The supply line is this big green line there. Did it the same way, cut it in half, teed everything in. With the supply line though, make sure that you drain your tanks in the motorhome. That way it don't have air pressure and you cut it and it goes wild. To drain the tanks, you can always, what I usually do is just get inside of the motorhome and hit the brakes a bunch of times to deplete all the air. But once these are hooked up, now we have one more line that comes off of our tank that we installed that'll run towards the back of our RV where it's connected to a fitting. Now at the back of our motorhome, I ran that airline that was up there from our tank. When you route this, obviously, you don't want any kinks in it or run it next to hot or moving parts. And that's going to get connected to this fitting. So our fitting here, I just drilled a couple holes, bolted it in place where we can get to it. So the way all these fittings work, they're quick connects. And what you want to do when you cut these lines is you don't want to use a regular pair of snips. You want to use something like this, or even just a razor edge, or they actually make tubing cutting tools you can use. But when you cut it, you want to make sure that it's a clean cut and it's straight. That way we don't develop any leaks. And with these just being a quick connect tight, you simply just push them right into place there. So once you have everything hooked up, it's not a bad idea to actually start up the motorhome, let it build full air pressure, and once it does, turn it off. And we're going to do this so we can check for any air leaks. Generally speaking, if you have one, it should be pretty loud. You should be able to hear it and identify it. You can kind of go a step further and get some soapy water and spray down all the fittings that we worked with. If you see any bubbles continuing to develop, you have an air leak. I checked ours, we're in really good shape, no leaks. If you were to have a leak, what you would do, let all the air out of the system again, disconnect the line or from the fitting that's leaking, recut it, plug it back in, and go through that process again until you're confident that you don't have any air leaks. But now that we verified we don't have any air leaks and we're in good shape, last thing to do for our complete kit here is take the wireless coach link and set it on your dash how you want it, and then this is just going to simply plug into one of your 12 volt outlets. To begin our installation on our vehicle side here, we're going to first start by mounting up some of the main components here at the front of our truck, and those components are going to include our breakaway switch as well as our quick connect fitting for our airline. For our breakaway switch, it actually works out really well on the passenger side. There's a piece of factory metal in there, and there's actually a bolt hole that's already drilled through there that's perfect size and almost perfect placement too. So I just used a nut and a bolt to secure our breakaway switch there. And there's a couple of wires that come off the breakaway switch, an orange and a black one. These are going to run towards the driver's side and eventually go up in the engine compartment, but we'll hold off on that because we're going to run those the same time that we run our airline, which we'll plug into here eventually. For our fitting, I simply just removed, there's a factory bolt holding on our license plate bracket, pulled that bolt out, secured it up that way. Didn't even worry about putting another bolt through here because, I mean, this thing is rock solid. It's not going to go anywhere. But with that said, we can plug in our airline to this fitting. So I already got our airline ran, and I'll show you how I did that in a minute. But when we go to plug this in, you want to make sure that the end of it has a good clean cut on it, straight and not burred up or anything. So you want to use a tool like this, even just a regular razor edge, or they make tubing cutters you can get as well. But that's a good example of what we're looking for here. Good straight clean cut, and these are just quick connects. So actually all of the fittings that we're going to be plugging into are going to be the same types. They'll all be the same way. But these are just simply going to push it right into place. You'll feel it kind of snap in, and that's really all there is to it. So what we're able to do now is take our breakaway switch wires and our airline and route that up into the engine compartment. So these just ran along through this edge and kind of closer towards the outside of our vehicle. So if you look right here, you can see where our orange and black wire and our airline tube runs up, and it's going to go into the engine compartment kind of almost just behind our headlight. Now in our engine compartment, driver's side, behind the headlight area, this is where our wires and our airline tube came up. So as far as our breakaway switch wires go, they did fall just a little bit short, so I did have to extend the length of them. So I just used some butt connectors. The black breakaway switch wire, I was able to find a little piece of black wire there, so that's the same color. The orange breakaway switch wire, best I could do was red, so that's what color that's going to be for now as well. But we'll just set these aside for now and move on to our airline, which is going to get plugged into our main operating unit. So our main operating unit is this piece here, and I mounted it up just by using a couple self-tapping screws. And from there, so we have an air in and an air out port off of our main operating unit. The air in one is the one you want to plug into from the tube that we ran up from the front of our truck, from that fitting. So the fitting at the front, airline tube comes up, and you cut it to length and plug it into the air in quick fitting there on our main operating unit. And then if we look, we're going to have two wires coming off of the main operating unit. They're both going to be black. You just need to take one of them, doesn't matter which one, and one of them is going to be a ground, which is this wire here. I just crimped on a ring terminal, used a self-tapping screw, and ran it into our core support there, and that's going to provide us with the ground. The other remaining black wire, this is going to get connected to the black wire from our breakaway switch. So what we're going to do is use a butt connector. So the end strip back, put the butt connector on, and crimp it down. I am using heat shrink type butt connectors. These just offer a little more protection against corrosion because the ends seal up, but the ones that come with the kit will work just fine. So what I'm going to do is take our black wire from our breakaway switch. I'm going to strip back the insulation there, give that wire a good twist. I'm going to plug it into the other end of the butt connector. Get it crimped down. Make sure it's got a good connection. Then I'll come back with my heat source and seal up the ends. So as far as the other wire goes from our breakaway switch, the red one, it was the orange one, but like I said, we extended it. What you're going to do is take that, strip back the end, and then you're going to take the included bundle of brown, they call it violet, but it looks brown to me. Take that wiring, twist those two ends together, the bare ends, put them in one end of a butt connector. The other end of the butt connector, you're going to take the included fuse holder, connect it in there, and then take the other end there, crimp on a ring terminal, and put it to the positive battery terminal. So I use this nut there, that post. There's no factory wires going to it or anything, so it looked like a good spot. Pulled the nut off with a 10mm socket, put the ring terminal over it, and tighten it down. Now when you're doing this too, make sure that the fuse is not installed in the holder. We're going to put that in at the very end once we have everything hooked up. Now we can do that brown or violet wire that we hooked up a moment ago. That's going to run to the inside of our truck. And while we're doing that, we might as well run the other airline. So the one that says air out, and take that airline, cut it clean, plug it into there. And the brown wire and that are going to run right up through here and continue to run back, and there will be a grommet in the firewall that you can poke a hole through and run everything through. So our wires, like I said, ran into the inside of our truck, and they're going to come out on the driver's side floorboard, kind of towards the outside of our truck. I do want to mention it's a little easier to see and work with. There's a panel that's here, and if you remove it, just get in there better, see a lot easier. You don't have to, but it definitely helps. Panel just folds down. There'll be two plastic fasteners you pop out, and then there's also a metal piece too that you can pull off. It's just each corner of it has an 8mm head bolt, so you can zip them out and a little easier to work with. But with that said, let's take a look underneath there and see where those our tube and our wire came out. So there's that grommet there in the firewall. That's where our tubing and our wiring comes through. The violet or brown colored wire is going to get hooked up to our coach link or your indicator light if you have that system. And then the tube is going to go to our actuator cylinder, which is on our brake pedal arm. So the tube comes down to our actuator cylinder and plugs into the fitting there. Obviously you need to mount this up to the brake pedal arm. So what you can do is clamp it around that part there. There's kind of a bend in the arm, and I did it just above that bend. Once the cylinder is mounted, you can secure or anchor it to the firewall. It actually works out really well on these Rangers. You can cut some of the carpeting and sound deadening material away. And right there, there's a factory stud that's already welded to the firewall. And originally, there was just a plastic fastener on there to kind of keep your carpet pushed back. But you could take that off, take your anchor, slide it over that stud, and then you will have to use a nut or pick up a nut. I used a flange nut, or I would suggest using a nylon lock nut or even a regular nut with the split lock washer, something to just prevent that nut from backing off, and anchor it to the firewall. Now when you're doing this, you want your cable to be as straight as possible, and you want there to be an appropriate amount of slack in it. So there's a set screw on that side of the anchor, and that's how you can kind of control your slack. You can also move, you know, your clamp back and forth on the brake pedal arm, but you want it in the resting state, resting position here, to have just a little bit of movement in it, about like that. That way you're not putting tension on the brake pedal arm, and that way it's not so loose that, you know, the braking system has to work really hard just to move the pedal a little bit. So that's about the sweet spot. And once that is all set up, we're going to have a wire coming off of our cylinder. That's the reed switch. There will be some things we need to hook up to it. So this black wire here, that's coming from a reed switch off of our actuator cylinder, and that'll split off into two wires, a blue one and a brown one. The brown one we're going to hook up to that violet or brown colored wire that we ran into the truck with our airline tube. And pretty simple, just butt connect them there. And then the blue wire coming from the reed switch, that's going to get connected to the red wire from our wireless coach link box. And that is going to be mounted right here in this area, just kind of behind the kick panel. So this wire will drop down and kind of run right over to this area where we have the box mounted up. So here's a view of our wireless coach link box. Like I said, driver's side kick panel. There's a bundle of wire, factory wire there, and I kind of just slid it underneath it, and it was already pretty tight, but I just used a zip tie to kind of hold everything together. And there's a wire coming off of that box, right? One of them, like I said, we already hooked up to our reed switch. The other wire is just going to be a ground wire. So that's going to run kind of underneath of our dash towards our center console where we have it grounded out. So like I said, our wire ran over towards the center console, and there's some factory grounds actually attached to this piece of metal, this reinforcement steel here. And so I figured, why not utilize that factory ground? So I removed that bolt using an 8mm, crimped on a ring terminal to the white ground wire coming from our coach link, put it over, and simply just tighten the bolt back down. Now moving back into the engine compartment, what we have left to do is our vacuum line fitting. So if you look at this plastic tube that goes to the brake booster, that's the area we're going to be working with. And essentially what I'm going to do is just cut out kind of this bent section here. So I'll go from about here to here. And if we got to take out more later on, we can. But for now, we're going to start with that and start to kind of piece everything together so we can slip all our parts in there. So this piece that remains into the brake booster, what we're going to do is pull it out, and then we're going to be using that fitting as well as some others to kind of piece everything together and get all of our lines tapped in. So what we're going to do is kind of pre-assemble our vacuum setup. And since the Ranger has these big plastic lines, we're going to be kind of putting some things together. So I'm actually using this Demco adapter kit for Fords, and we did take it apart a little bit. So if you get this, it comes with some tubing, and then there's a 90 here that's supposed to plug right into the brake booster. But issue is, if we put the 90-degree bend in it, it'll be completely out of the way. So took that off, and honestly, you know, you can always get this stuff at your local auto parts store too. I believe, so I think this T is 3/8 up here, and then these are, either 5/8 or 11/16, something along those lines. And then the tubing. So, but with that said, so we have our separate tee, and you can make this work with the parts that come with it. It's just, there's a lot of adapters and different size hoses, and not a lot of room to work. So this is kind of what I come up with. But with that said, that piece that we just pulled out of the brake booster, I shortened it down, so maybe about a 1/2 inch left where it goes over the fitting. I'm going to plug this into our tube there. And I'm going to take one of these clamps that actually comes with this tee, clamp it down. And then what we're going to do is put in our check valve. So this is actually a different check valve than the one that comes with it. And I'm using this one because it has the thicker ends on it. The ones that come with it have 3/8, and it's really hard to get to work. So you can actually grab this here at eTrailer. But what I've done, this is still just a little too small to fit tight in the hose. So what I did, that little bit of extra plastic that we cut off, I just made kind of, I guess you call them sleeves, push them over. And before I put this in, actually, if you can see on this check valve, the red paint there, that needs to face towards the engine. So imagine if my body's the engine, that's how we're setting it up. So we'll slide them on, and then I'm going to push this into the hose. And then once I have that all the way in there, I'll come back and put my clamp on it. So here's what I came up with. Once that check valve was in, put the clamp on it. On the other side of the check valve, did the same thing. Slid the piece over, another, couple inch piece of tubing, get another clamp. And essentially this is pretty close to being ready to plug in. What I am going to do though is take the included 3/8 hose and just push it over that part of the tee. It'll probably be easier just to have it on there already as opposed to trying to do this separately. So I'll push this on, and now we're ready to get this in the truck. We'll go ahead, get this lined up, push that into our deal there, and then probably gonna have to cut our tube so it'll line up, and I'll kind of eyeball that, cut the tube, get it started over that, clamp it, and you should be good to go there. So here's what all this looks like hooked up, and then that 3/8 tube that we put off that tee, that's gonna run right down towards the front of the truck and go to our main operating unit. There's our line going to our main operating unit. And just before you get to the operating unit, you do need to install another check valve. This is one of the included ones. This is going to work fine. Just make sure that the black portion of the check valve is going to face towards the main operating unit. So cut the line to length, plug in one end of the check valve, then a couple inch piece of hose from the check valve to the main operating unit. Now with everything hooked up, we can take our fuse and place it into the fuse holder. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Demco Air Force One supplemental braking system with the wireless coach link monitor on our 2021 Ford Ranger.